I'm not going to ask you to give out any specific picks. We want people to go to the big ticket, right?
Hey, whatever you want. Whatever you want.
Right out of the gate, remind people where they're going to hear Teddy Horn.
WADK 1540 AM, 101.1 FM, Monday through Friday, 4 to 5. Big ticket with Teddy Horn.
Now, I've said this, and I mean it. With Alexa, I leave this on all day. And when I hear you, give out that walking around money tips, I grab my pen and pencil, and sometimes I want to give you a hug, other times I want to hunt you down. But here we are now. We're halfway through the NFL season, Teddy.
Yep.
This has not been a banner year for folks in the Northeast.
Sure hasn't.
What's the biggest surprise?
I don't know that it's much of a surprise that the Patriots are in the bottom of the division. I mean, coming into the season, I kind of looked at it like you got the Dolphins, you got the Bills, and then this what was the revamped Jets team with Aaron Rodgers coming in. And I mean, Patriots really not making too much additions in the offseason. You kind of realistically had to assume that they were going to be probably the last team in the division, barring some sort of big change in one of the current players. But I mean, for them to be this bad, that is probably the shock. That's probably the shock, to be competing for a top 5 pick in the April's NFL draft. That's probably a shock. But with that being said, I mean, I think if you're a Patriots fan like myself right now, you probably have to be thinking, well, I kind of hope they lose for the next few weeks and until the end of the season at this point, unfortunately.
I want to talk more about that, about the AFC East in a second, but specifically about New England. And Jim Campbell who's on WADK, has had biographers of Coach Belichick on, and we focused on him a lot. It seems incomprehensible that we're sitting here, literally, that coach is answering questions about whether or not he feels like he's playing for his job.
Right. Yeah, I know. It seems like each week after every loss, there's some beat reporter or somebody on air saying that they've heard from sources that the Krafts are ready to move on for Bill Belichick. I mean, we heard that this week. I forget who it was that made the initial report that said if Belichick loses in Germany this week, we could be looking at a change of coach, come bye week. But I've talked about this before with people, and the interesting thing is that the Patriots are in such a unique position where their coach is actually their GM as well. So it's, all right, well, you want to move on from Belichick? Do you want to move on from Belichick as a whole? Do you want to move on from Belichick as GM? Do you want to move on from, you know what I mean? There's different layers to it. Overall, you can point the finger at Belichick and moves he's made as a GM that, haven't panned out as great. But at the end of the day, and something I've kind of reiterated, like, it's not always brighter on the other side. If you fire Belichick, if you get rid of Belichick, well, okay, who takes his place? And do they have the type of experience? No, absolutely not. Can they run this team as well? It's a big coin flip. So overall, where I lean with that is you have a Hall of Fame coach, whether you want to make the Brady versus Belichick debate. Well, I won't go into that, but I mean, he is one of, if not the best coach of all time. It seems crazy to say, all right, after this really bad season, see you later. I don't see it happening, but I've been wrong before.
Boy, having success like they've had in any franchise makes parting much harder, doesn't it?
I know it. I mean, obviously it's been a bit, since Brady, there's been some down years, but all in all, when you kind of look at the talent he's been able to work with, he still has done a solid job. I mean, you look at the injuries he's had this year in particularly, and you don't want to blame injuries, obviously not, but Matt Judon goes down early. Christian Gonzalez, who was the rookie of the month in September, goes down early as well. We didn't really see any growth from him. They've had a lot of turnovers in that secondary, which is usually Belichick's kind of main spot, where he's been able to flourish and find the best out of players, is kind of in that secondary. That hasn't been the case. A million injuries offensively on that offensive line. And then once again, for what seems like the fifth, sixth straight year, it's just a not very talented wide receivers core. So there's a lot of holes that you could point to a GM and say, well, why didn't you fix that? And you could also point at coaching as well. It's just a tough position, certainly one that Patriots fans like myself are not used to.
Can you see in the remaining 7-8 weeks, can you see any looking forward, any game, any week in particular that you feel like you will take the Pats?
I mean, this week, traditionally, the Belichick and the Patriots in the past have been really good in these out-of-country games, the London games, the Germany games in the past. I believe I was looking at it like Belichick on his career is like 5-0 against the spread in some of these games against an Indianapolis team that's with a backup quarterback. So that's a situation where Indianapolis is favored there. Possibly, Patriots play scrappy. And then next week, you have the Giants. I'm not 100% where that game is, but Giants are rolling into that game with what looks to be undrafted rookie.
What a mess.
As their starting quarterback. They're kind of in shambles with the Patriots as well, but they still have some really, really tough games left on the schedule. You still Buffalo have to go through Buffalo, still have the Jets late in the season. Whether or not Aaron Rodgers will be back, we'll have to see. I mean, in terms of teams that...
Wait a second. What did you just say?
If Aaron Rodgers... we'll see.
What a weird situation. By the way, that game is at MetLife.
Okay. All right. Well, at that point, with the way those two teams are playing right now, the Giants and the Patriots, I don't really know if it matters where they play that game.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see. There's certainly not many games where I'd take the Patriots. Yeah.
Specifically about the AFC East, what happened up in Buffalo? Because I did not expect this. They've actually kept the Jets in it.
Yeah. Yeah, they have.
Their lousy play.
It seems like in Buffalo, they haven't really been able to find much consistency in the post-Daboll era on that offense. I mean, once Brian Daboll left last year, you even kind of saw this last year, especially into the postseason, where they really started to have some hiccups. Offensively, they haven't really been able to find their stride under Ken Dorsey, and that seemed to be the biggest of issues. Josh Allen, them trying to overprotect him at times, not letting him to really be himself and scramble out of the pocket. And the biggest thing for the Buffalo Bills is if they had any sort of running game, that would make it so much easier for Josh Allen, but they don't. In every single year, it seems like they add James Cook in the draft 2 years ago. That's supposed to be their workhorse back, but they still, every single week, it seems like Josh Allen at times, half the time, is still the leading rusher because they just can't develop anything on the ground. It's such a passing offense. They're easy to game plan for defensively. So I think that's been your biggest issue with that team, not being able to consistently generate offense. We certainly saw that in that London game against Jacksonville about 3-4 weeks ago, where to start the game, they just looked like they were asleep. And it seems like that's happened far too often with this Buffalo Bills offense, which we're used to seeing them in the past couple of years as one of the best offenses in the league, and that hasn't been the case this year.
I definitely did not see this happening. I'm going to stay away from the Taylor Swift saga. I'm tired of talking about that. Let's go over to the NFC. Are the Eagles what we think they are?
The Eagles are great. I mean, they're a great team, and I love the addition of Kevin Byard at the trade deadline, grabbing him from Tennessee. They were banged up in that secondary. A very convincing win against the Dallas Cowboys. But it's a wait-and-see situation. I also think that when you're comparing conferences here, AFC versus NFC, it's not a hot take to say that the talent, for the most part, is on the AFC. So, I mean, the Eagles certainly look tough, and they'll probably come into the NFC playoffs with that bye as the number one seed. You're probably going to have to go through Philadelphia to get into the playoffs, which is a very tall task. But at the end of the day, they're also dealing with injuries. I mean, Jalen Hurts now after this week is dealing with a knee sprain. We've seen Trevor Lawrence play through that. What'll that be like with Jalen Hurts, who's more of a mobile quarterback than Trevor Lawrence? Who knows? He just lost his safety blanket, his tight end, in Dallas Goedert. that becomes an issue. So they're starting to get a little bit banged up. I think we're going to see some holes in the Philadelphia Eagles. It wouldn't shock me to see down the line here them lose a division game to, maybe a Washington, or the second time around to Dallas.
But lose it once once they've already has this locked up, because at this point,
yeah, they will. But I'm saying they're going to be fighting for that top spot, that number one overall spot in the NFC. I mean, they're getting closer and closer to locking up the NFC East. Quickly. Now they got it. Yeah. Now they're looking for locking up the NFC as a whole. In terms of once they get into the playoffs, I think there's certainly teams that can beat them. It's not like the Eagles are this upper echelon. They are the class of the NFC. That's what their record shows. But
don't tell people in Philly that.
Listen, John, I've been fighting with Philadelphia, the city, for years now. If they
it used to be that we could say, well, you don't have the trophy. But hey, I'm not going to ask you unless you have already given it out on your show. Have you picked this? Do you have a Super Bowl idea in your head?
I had picked one coming into the year that obviously, could have some changes to it. I originally picked Kansas City versus San Francisco. San Francisco is certainly.
What's happening out there?
Listen, they have some injuries offensively. That's a big issue. That secondary isn't what it was last year. They still have one of the best front sevens in the league defensively. But I think they're also another situation where I said that Buffalo is certainly missing former offensive coordinator Brian Daboll. I think it's a situation in San Francisco, man, that they're really missing their former defensive coordinator now in Houston, doing a great job, in D'Amico Ryans, their head coach over there. He was phenomenal for that team. On top of that, I do think that there is a sense kind of with that San Francisco offense. I don't want to use this term, but kind of Patriots-esque, where you kind of know what you're going to see. There's going to be a lot of dump-off type screens, kind of a lot of end-arounds, not a lot of big home run type shots downfield. And for a defense, that can become a little bit predictable, especially when you're maybe limited at quarterback. Like Brock Purdy isn't certainly as talented as the rest of the league. He's just in a very, very good system. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback, but is he as talented as a Jalen Hurts? No, I don't think so. And I don't think that's really, a hot take either. So I think they'll be fine. They have a tough game coming up this week against Jacksonville. That'll be certainly a test. If they lose that, that's 4 in a row. But I still think San Francisco is right up there with Philadelphia in terms of the class of the NFC.
Before we move out of football, a dark horse? Give us a dark horse here.
A dark horse. You could really make the case. All right, one dark horse. I don't really think they are a dark horse, but right now the Cincinnati Bengals are in last in a very talented NFC North division, AFC North division.
Fun. It is fun to watch those games.
Yeah.
Anytime I see any one of those teams, I'm in.
Yeah, I do think. They still could be a contender and a fun team. Right now they would be 7th. They would be the last team in the playoffs in the AFC. And I still consider them a top contender. In terms of dark horses in the NFC, watch out for possibly the Minnesota Vikings. Of late, they've started to figure some things out defensively with Brian Flores now deeper into the season, and that was kind of always their issue. They're supposed to be getting probably the best receiver in football back in Justin Jefferson. And look, Josh Dobbs in one game in relief proved to be a serviceable backup, and Jaron Hall as well, their rookie that they started in that game before going out and exiting that game with a concussion, was something like 5 of 6 or 6 of 7 with 70 yards or so. So that's still a pretty solid offense, and they're certainly a team in a weaker NFC that I certainly could see them grabbing the 6 or 7 seed.
I wanted to just look on my DraftKings because I know I hit a nice parlay on the Vikings a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to brag about that, but I can't log in. Moving on to baseball real quick. I have to admit, I enjoyed watching the World Series, but I think I might have been alone.
Yeah,
we knew coming in that this was the network's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Out of the scenarios.
And even with the Rangers, who are probably the more marketable team, obviously over the Diamondbacks, they're missing the biggest star on their team in Jacob deGrom. But it was a fun World Series. I pointed to the fact that if Arizona hadn't blown, if you remember Game 1, where Arizona brought a 5-3 lead, if I'm not mistaken, into the ninth inning. In that ninth inning, Corey Seager ends up tying the game with a 2-run home run. Arizona had dominated that game up until that ninth inning. They go into extra innings. Adolis Garcia hits the game-winning home run. If Arizona hadn't dropped that first game, we could have been looking at a much different World Series. So that was the blunder, certainly, of the World Series. And that's what is kind of to be expected with an Arizona team that is really, really young, and I don't think we've seen the last of them.
I should have exercised my right to cash out early. That's something that a lot of the online betting apps allow you to do, and I don't do that enough. Meetings out in Arizona, the Yankees made a lot of noise, obviously. I'm sure you heard about that.
Yeah.
What about the Sox?
Brian Cashman, man, he seems like that Yankees fans are turning on him fast. I saw the video of him going back and forth with one of the reporters. I mean, I said it yesterday on the show. It is shocking to me that Brian Cashman hasn't lost his job. I mean, here in Boston and New England.
But it's that thing again, man, about success. You hold on to, even if it's 10 years ago, when you have a run like that, people hold on too long.
I know it. It's one of those, the Batman quote, right? You either live long enough to see, what's the quote? You live long enough to see yourself become the villain, or you die a hero, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Yeah, that might be what's happening with Brian Cashman and Bill Belichick right now, because, yeah, for him to go in front of a hot mic and say that there's nothing wrong with this franchise, I think this is a really, really good franchise after multiple years of disappointment, multiple years where they've had free agency signings that have not worked out whatsoever, years where they've seemed to lose trades. I mean, the Sonny Gray one in particular, where he's a Cy Young candidate now.
That's not a Yankee way of operating.
It certainly isn't. And listen, I said it right off the bat this season. I expect them to go out and get Cody Bellinger. Cody Bellinger coming off a great year where he bounced back with the Chicago Cubs on a 1-year contract. He signed that 1-year contract, hoping to kind of flip the script, get paid this season. And I think that's exactly what will happen with the Yankees. They'll end up signing him to a big contract, and it could be another one that necessarily doesn't pan out based on Cody Bellinger's career and how it's been kind of up and down.
Our last 5 minutes together, predictions for Boston, and then we'll talk a little Celtics. You give us an update there.
So with the Red Sox, man, I mean, obviously the two Japanese pitchers that are going to be the talk of really the off season, there's going to be some big bids for those guys. I would look, I mean, they've already been kind of linked to him, but I would look to take someone, a former Yankee. I mean, you want to bolster that rotation. Lately, the Red Sox have been kind of reluctant to match the big offers for kind of the star players of past years. For whatever reason, that doesn't seem like the Red Sox way of the past, but John Henry seems to be kind of balking a little bit and getting a little bit more cheap. So if you want to go down that list a little bit more, I really like Jordan Montgomery, who's coming off a World Series win with the Texas Rangers, a former New York Yankee, right around 30 years old, and really seems to be kind of hitting his prime at around 30 years old. It seems like you could probably get him for a lesser price than the guys like Blake Snell and Aaron Nola, who are set to hit free agency as well. So that's a guy I'd like to see. And then as for the Red Sox lineup, I mean, I think it's all about kind of developing those younger guys. I think that Tristan Casas is a guy that showed good promise. Masa Yoshida looks like he could be a solid player for years to come. It looks like that was a pretty sound investment as well. So I think there are points there in the lineup that you can build from for sure. It's just bolstering that staff and building up that bullpen as well. That's kind of been the weakness for the past couple of years with the Red Sox.
And finally, this is that time of year. I'm not going to ask you too much about the NHL, but I will tell you that the Islanders are right in the middle again. I feel like it's just we press pause, and then there we are in the middle again. But the Bruins are looking pretty good out of the gate.
They are, yeah.
What about over at the Garden? Talk to us about the Celtics.
I will say that on Tuesday night, where it was election day, the NBA didn't have any games. I was forced to throw a NHL parlay.
NHL bet, okay. I have not had luck, man. I hope you do better than I do.
I actually went with San Jose, who had lost 11 in a row. I felt
You
like they were
figured it was
due.
about time?
They were going up against my arch enemy, Philadelphia, so I picked San Jose. It panned out.
Good
Um,
man.
so 1-0 with hockey picks on the year. But as for the Celtics, obviously it's they just came off another loss to Philadelphia. Ironically, that's 2 in a row for the C's. But it is pretty
That was
interesting.
close.
They made it close at the end. It was a good game there at the end. And those are 2 games where the Celtics shot below 40% from the field the past 2 losses. And one of those losses went into overtime. The other one was a 3-point game that came down to the buzzer. So if they're in these games against good teams on bad shooting nights, I think you're looking at a pretty good team. On nights that they're not shooting well, they're still in games against good teams. I'm not condoning losses, but to think of the bright spot here, they didn't play their best basketball last night. They didn't play their best basketball on Monday night, and they were still right on the verge of beating 2 good teams in the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Philadelphia 76ers. So the margin of error, basically, for what I'm saying with the Celtics is ginormous, really. This is such a talented team. I expect them to make some sort of move at the trade deadline in terms of the buyout market. We always see kind of veteran players get waived during the trade deadline, and the Celtics, I believe, will be an active team in the buyout market because they are missing a veteran piece at the big man position behind Kristaps Porzingis, who right now averages the 7th most fouls in the NBA. He always seems to be in foul trouble. Then you kind of dip into Luke Cornett, who really isn't a great serviceable backup. That's where I see the Celtics possibly adding someone at the trade deadline, but we're a ways away from that. I believe I'm not overreacting to the Celtics' past 2 losses. I still think that this is a top 2, and I don't think they're 2 team in the NBA.
In the early running, who else are we keeping an eye on?
Obviously, Denver. Denver seems to be picking up right where they left off. Jamal Murray, their point guard, is going to be out for the next month or so with a hamstring strain, and that's going to hinder them. In the Eastern Conference, you saw it with Philadelphia, and I think Joel Embiid made a great point. They got rid of Harden, and he had a comment that said nobody on this team has an ego anymore. And you saw that last night. They're a deep team that is great with passing the ball. They have great ball movement offensively. Milwaukee, with the addition of Damian Lillard and obviously Giannis over there, will be incredibly tough. And then I'm very interested to see out in the Western Conference what sort of life and how long we see the Dallas Mavericks continue at the pace that they're at. I liked that they brought back Kyrie Irving. I know that's kind of crazy for me to say as a Celtics fan, but it seems like Kyrie has really taken a backseat role to Luka Doncic, and they're starting to play some really good basketball. So I'm interested to see how long that can last and if they can actually contend in a very, very hectic and competitive Western Conference.
4:00, Monday through Friday.
Yes, sir.
It's a rare, occasionally Teddy takes a day off, and then I'm like, well, I guess I'm on my own today. But just to, again, remind people where to find you.
4 to 5, Monday through Friday. WADK.com, 1540 AM and 101.1 FM.
Teddy, thank you so much.
Don, always a pleasure. Thanks, man.